House prices in the UK are falling, and both of the leading indexes, so Halifax and Nationwide, are negative year on year. Now, to me, this is just the start of a much bigger correction or crash or whatever you want to call it. But to some people that I feel are still in denial, they're still clutching at straws that things are going to be okay and that this is just a temporary blip. And one of the things that I've seen pop up recently is what I want to kind of challenge or debunk in this video. And that is about affordability. So this crash, as I see it, is being caused by affordability, is being caused by a squeeze on income, inflation, etc., and interest rates going up. So it's an affordability crisis. But I'm seeing people saying that we're not going to see a crash because mortgages have been stress tested over the past decade or so. So what I want to do very quickly is take a look at what the stress test was and then completely just invalidate that argument because it just does not stand up to scrutiny. So I've highlighted the most important paragraph. Bear in mind, this stress test has now been abolished. So that's how good it was that they've decided to do away with it completely. But either way, this is what was put in place to try to protect both lenders and borrowers after what happened during the global financial crisis. So this was the recommendation. When assessing affordability, mortgage lenders should apply an interest rate stress test that assesses whether borrowers could still afford their mortgages if, at any point over the first 5 years of the loan, their mortgage rate were to be 3 percentage points higher than the reversion rate specified in the mortgage contract at the time of origination. So what they're saying there is if your mortgage rate was 2%, but your revert to rate, so your SVR, your standard variable rate, was maybe 4%, then they're going to stress test you at 7% to make sure you can afford the monthly payments if that happened. Now, in theory, that is a great idea. And I think actually it was helpful to do this. It did help to whittle out some of the people that should not be borrowing that level of money. But based on the circumstances we currently find ourselves in, it wasn't enough. It clearly wasn't enough. So let me talk you through why in this video. The first thing, mortgage rates are pretty much already at the stress test threshold. So if we look back in 2020, so about 3 years ago, so a lot of the mortgages that were taken out then are coming up for remortgage now. We can see that the revert to rate, which is the purple line here, was about 3.5%, maybe just above 3.5%. So we're talking about 6.5% to 7% as the stress test. And as we can see at the moment, we're starting to see, well, we've seen news articles over the past week or two saying the average 2-year fixed and the average 5 years fixed is now above 6%. So we're very much approaching that stress test threshold. But that only stress tested the one thing. It didn't take into account all of the other things that mean that this test in some ways is irrelevant, because all of the other things add up to make this individual test not suitable enough to provide protection in the environment we currently find ourselves in. So the first one I want to show you, and I touched on this briefly in a recent video, and that is inflation. So if you imagine you were stress tested just after or just before COVID, or maybe just after COVID, so around spring 2020, after the first lockdown, people were getting stress tested at 3.5% plus 3%, so about 6.5% to 6.75%. Now, no one knew at that time, obviously some people did talk about it, I talked about it on the channel, that inflation could be inbound. And what we've seen since then, so since the start of 2020, £1,000 at the start of 2020 would now be £1,207. So that is 20.7% inflation. So I'm certain this stress test did not account for the fact that inflation was going to be 20% over the period that someone would have taken out a mortgage. The next thing it didn't take into account is that real world wages are actually getting destroyed at the moment. So although nominal pay, so the number of the amount of money you get paid is up, real world pay is down because inflation is so high. So people are getting poorer. So again, the stress test did not take into account that real world pay would be down substantially at the moment. And this is reflected, and I know this is a strange source of information, but Asda have an income tracker that they use, and their recent survey showed across the UK as a whole, the amount households had to spend on themselves after paying taxes and essential bills fell by 9.2% during Q1 to an average of £213 per week compared to £236 per week in Q1 2022, and that's probably come down further in Q2 2023 as well. So it'll be interesting to see the latest report on that matter. And the reason that is so important is, one, it proves that people's disposable income is down, but also disposable income or consumption is a massive part of UK GDP. So in the latest report from the UK Parliament, it says here that household consumption is the largest element of expenditure across the economy, accounting for 61% of the total in 2022. So household spending, disposable income, over 60% of expenditure in GDP terms. That is a massive chunk. So what we're going to see is people's incomes have been squeezed. So their mortgages have gone up, inflation is up, real world wage growth is down, people have less money to spend. So people may be able to squeak by and just about afford the mortgage payment that they've got. However, if they can still do that, what does that mean? They're going to sacrifice all of the other optional spending. And if they do that, what happens? Businesses will go bust because they're not buying products or services. And when over 60% of your economy is based on people buying stuff, that means businesses are going to be in big trouble. And if businesses are going to be in big trouble, that means we're going to enter recession. And if businesses are in trouble, we're going to see job losses. And if we see job losses, then we're going to see repossessions, which means we're going to see an increase in supply of properties coming to the market. But even if you said that we weren't going to have repossessions, I would expect that people that are finding themselves very, very close to the breadline, that are just about breaking even or just about getting by each month because their mortgage payments have gone up so much, their houses may not be repossessed. But I think there's a very good chance they're going to take the decision to sell the house and maybe downsize and relieve some of that financial pressure. And that is what we're seeing at the moment in the stats, is that the housing supply, so let me open up this chart. This is from UK Property Line, by the way, on Twitter. So make sure you give these guys a follow. But you can see here, let me hide the webcam very briefly. The current number of listings, number of available listings has shot up to about 425 to 430,000. The last time we were at this level was back here, which was at just after the first lockdown in 2020. So the supply of houses is skyrocketing at the moment, which is an indicator that even if people aren't getting repossessed because they can't afford their mortgage payments, they might just about be squeaking by and are deciding to sell voluntarily. So my overall conclusion is that the stress tests that they put in place, whilst yes, it may help prevent repossessions, it's not going to prevent, in my opinion, a mass supply of properties coming to the market. And also, it's not going to prevent a recession and job losses and then ultimately some repossessions off of the back of that. Now, if you're interested to see how big I think this house price crash is actually going to be, I released a video last week called How Far Will Prices Fall? I'm going to pop up a link to that now, and I'll see you guys over there.